The dusty floorboards of Willow Creek's barn creaked beneath Kip Vance's boots as he stood frozen at the entrance, his eyes locked on the auburn-haired beauty across the room. In all his 24 years on the frontier, nothing had ever stolen his breath quite like the sight of Pearl Hayes spinning gracefully in the center of the dance floor, her emerald dress catching the golden lamplight like a jewel among coal. The year was 1874, and Willow Creek, Colorado was celebrating its annual harvest with the biggest barn dance of the season. Kip had ridden into town just 3 days prior. A cattle drover looking for work after the last herd had been delivered to the railroad in Cheyenne. He'd planned to stay only long enough to rest his horse and replenish his supplies before continuing south. But fate, it seemed, had other ideas. "You gonna stand there gawking all night, or actually step inside, cowboy?" A gruff voice broke through Kip's trance. Silas Thompson, the town blacksmith, chuckled as he pushed past with a flask in hand. Kip adjusted his hat nervously and cleared his throat. "Just getting my bearings is all." "Well, get 'em quick. Best fiddler in 3 counties is playing tonight, and Miss Hayes has already turned down half the men in town." Silas winked before disappearing into the crowd. The barn had been transformed from a practical shelter for livestock into a warm haven of celebration. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a honeyed glow over the rough-hewn space. Tables laden with food lined one wall, while a small band of musicians occupied the opposite corner. The center had been cleared for dancing, and that's where Pearl Hayes moved like she belonged to the music itself. Kip wasn't one for dancing. The trail had taught him to ride, rope, and shoot, but it had given him little opportunity to learn the finer social graces. Still, something about this night felt different. Something about her made him want to try. He made his way to the refreshment table, where a large bowl of punch awaited thirsty dancers. As he reached for a cup, a soft voice spoke beside him. "I wouldn't drink that if I were you. The Thornton boys spiked it an hour ago." Kip turned to find himself face to face with the woman who had captured his attention from across the room. Up close, her eyes were the clear blue of a mountain lake, and a light dusting of freckles crossed her nose and cheeks. "Much obliged for the warning, miss," he managed, tipping his hat slightly. "Kip Vance." "Pearl Hayes," she replied with a smile that reached those remarkable eyes. "You're new to Willow Creek." "Just passing through," he confirmed, suddenly regretting those words. Or, at least, that was the plan. Pearl tilted her head slightly, a curious expression crossing her features. "And now I'm thinking Willow Creek might have more to offer than I first realized." A faint blush colored her cheeks as she glanced toward the dance floor. The band had just struck up a lively reel, and couples were forming lines. "Do you dance, Mr. Vance?" she asked. Kip hesitated. "Not well, Miss Hayes. I've spent more time with horses than with proper company." Pearl's laugh was like the gentle ringing of distant bells. "Well, there's nothing proper about our dances here. It's just about having fun." She held out her hand. "I'd be happy to show you." His calloused hand engulfed her smaller one, and before he could protest further, Pearl was leading him onto the floor. The music swelled around them as she positioned him among the other dancers. "Just follow my lead," she whispered, "and no one will notice if you miss a step or two." As the fiddles sang out the first notes of the dance, Kip found himself moving awkwardly at first, then with growing confidence as Pearl guided him through the steps. Her patience was endless as he stumbled, stepped on her toes, and occasionally moved in the wrong direction. But her smile never faltered, and soon he was laughing alongside her at his own mistakes. "You're a natural," she teased as they circled each other. "I've got a good teacher," he replied, surprising himself with his own boldness. The reel gave way to a waltz, and Pearl's expression softened as she stepped closer, placing her hand on his shoulder. "This one's easier," she promised. "Just 3 steps, over and over." Kip swallowed hard as he placed his hand respectfully at her waist. The scent of lavender drifted from her hair, and he found himself entranced once more as they began to move in time with the music. Slowly at first, then with more assurance, they glided across the floor. "What brings you to Willow Creek, Mr. Vance?" Pearl asked, her voice cutting through the pleasant fog that had settled over his mind. "Work," he answered simply. "I've been driving cattle up from Texas to the railheads. Season's over now. Thought I might head down to New Mexico for the winter." "That's quite a solitary life. It has its moments of peace. Stars look different when there's nothing but open prairie around you." He guided her through a gentle turn. "What about you? Have you always lived in Willow Creek?" Pearl nodded. "Born and raised. My father runs the general store. I help him with the books and tend to customers." "Sounds steady," Kip observed. "Steady, yes. But sometimes I wonder what lies beyond these mountains." A wistful note entered her voice. "I've read about San Francisco, Denver, even New York City in the newspapers. Places where the world moves faster than it does here." "Fast isn't always better," Kip said softly. "Though I reckon everyone should see a bit of the world at least once." The waltz ended, but before Pearl could step away, the band seamlessly transitioned into another tune. Without discussion, they remained together, continuing their dance and conversation as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Would you tell me about Texas?" Pearl asked, her eyes bright with curiosity. "What's it like down there?" Kip found himself describing the vast expanses of the Lone Star State, the cattle drives, the characters he'd met along the trail, and the adventures he'd had. Pearl listened intently, asking questions that revealed a sharp mind and a genuine interest in the world beyond Willow Creek. "You make it sound both terrifying and wonderful," she said when he finished telling her about a particularly harrowing river crossing. "That's a fair assessment of most worthwhile things in life," he replied with a smile. Dance after dance, they remained together. The fast-paced reels left them breathless and laughing, while the slower waltzes gave them time to talk and discover the common ground that existed between a wandering cowboy and a small-town shopkeeper's daughter. As the evening progressed, Kip became aware of curious glances and whispered comments from the other townsfolk. It was clear that Pearl was well regarded in Willow Creek, and her decision to spend the entire evening with a stranger had not gone unnoticed. "Your reputation might suffer, dancing with me all night," he murmured during a particularly slow tune. Pearl's eyes sparkled with amusement. "Mr. Vance, are you suggesting you're dangerous company?" "Not dangerous," he clarified. "Just unknown. And folks tend to be wary of what they don't know." "Well, I'm getting to know you just fine," she responded, her tone warm. "And I find myself quite pleased with the discovery." The band announced the final dance of the evening as midnight approached. Outside, the autumn air had grown chilly, but inside the barn, warmth radiated from the dancers and lanterns alike. The fiddler stepped forward and called out for partners to take their places for the last waltz. Without hesitation, Pearl turned to Kip, her expression open and inviting. "One more." He took her hand, now as familiar as if he'd held it his entire life. "I wouldn't miss it." As they moved together in perfect harmony, Kip realized something had changed within him during the course of this remarkable night. The road ahead, which had always beckoned with promise of new horizons, suddenly seemed less appealing than the possibility of staying put, at least for a while. When the final notes of the fiddle faded into silence, Pearl reluctantly stepped back from his embrace. "Dawn will be here soon," she said softly. "So it will." Kip glanced toward the barn doors, where the first hint of gray light was beginning to appear. "May I walk you home, Miss Hayes?" Pearl nodded, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I'd like that very much, Mr. Vance." They retrieved her shawl from a hook near the entrance, and Kip placed it carefully around her shoulders before offering his arm. Together, they stepped out into the cool pre-dawn air, leaving the emptying barn behind them. The streets of Willow Creek were quiet as they walked slowly toward the Hayes residence. A few early risers were already starting their day, the baker stoking his ovens, a stable hand feeding horses, but for the most part, they had the town to themselves. "Will you be leaving today?" Pearl asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. Kip considered the question. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "I've got no pressing engagements elsewhere." The Riverbed Ranch, just outside of town, is looking for experienced hands, Pearl offered tentatively. "My father mentioned it yesterday. The owner, Mr. Holden, lost 2 men to gold fever last month." "Is that so?" Kip couldn't help the smile that spread across his face. "Well, I might just have to pay Mr. Holden a visit then." They stopped in front of a neat 2-story house with a small garden out front. A sign reading, "Hayes General Merchandise," hung from the porch of the connected storefront. "This is me," Pearl said, turning to face him. The first rays of sunrise caught in her auburn hair, setting it ablaze with golden light. "Thank you for the dances, Miss Hayes," Kip said, suddenly aware that their time together was coming to an end. "All of them." "Thank you for being such a willing student," she replied with a soft laugh. "Though I suspect you're a quicker study than you let on." Their eyes met, and for a moment, Kip considered whether it would be too forward to ask when he might see her again. Before he could speak, the front door opened, and an older man with Pearl's same blue eyes stepped onto the porch. "There you are, Pearl," he called, his tone friendly but watchful. "Your mother was beginning to worry." "Coming, father," she answered before turning back to Kip. "The store opens at 8, she said quietly. "We carry excellent supplies for cowboys." With a final smile, she hurried up the path to her waiting father. Kip watched until she disappeared inside, then made his way back to the modest boarding house where he'd taken a room. As he walked, he found himself whistling one of the tunes from the dance, his steps lighter than they'd been in years. By the time he reached his room, the sun had fully risen, casting long shadows across the town. Kip stretched out on his bed, intending to rest for just a moment before seeking out the Riverbed Ranch. As sleep claimed him, his last conscious thought was of Pearl Hayes and the promise of seeing her again in just a few short hours. When Kip awoke, the sun had climbed high in the sky. He bolted upright, realizing he'd slept far longer than intended. A glance at his pocket watch confirmed his fear. It was already past noon. He washed and dressed in record time, donning his cleanest shirt and brushing the dust from his hat before heading out. His first stop was the livery stable, where his horse, Copper, greeted him with a soft nickering. "Sorry, boy," Kip murmured as he stroked the gelding's neck. "Overslept a bit, but we've got places to be." The stable hand, a lanky youth named Timothy, approached with a pitchfork in hand. "Your horse is doing just fine, Mr. Vance. Best behaved out of the bunch." "Glad to hear it," Kip replied. "Say, you wouldn't happen to know where I could find the Riverbed Ranch, would you?" Timothy brightened. "Sure do. Mr. Holden's place is about 3 miles north of town. Follow the main road until you hit the big cottonwood tree that's been struck by lightning, then take the fork to the right. Can't miss it." "Much obliged." Kip tipped his hat. "I'll be keeping Copper here a bit longer, if that's all right." "No problem at all," Timothy assured him. "We got plenty of space." With directions in hand, Kip headed toward the center of town, where the Hayes General Store stood. His heart quickened as he approached, and he took a moment to straighten his collar before pushing open the door. A small bell announced his arrival, and Kip found himself in a well-organized establishment filled with everything from foodstuffs to hardware. At the counter stood an older woman with graying auburn hair, who looked up from her ledger with a warm smile. "Good afternoon," she greeted him. "What can I help you with today?" Before Kip could respond, Pearl emerged from a back room carrying a stack of fabric bolts. She stopped short at the sight of him, a bright smile spreading across her face. "Mr. Vance," she said, placing the fabric on a nearby table. I was beginning to think you'd ridden out of town after all. And missed the chance to see Willow Creek's finest store? Not likely. Kip approached the counter, suddenly aware of Pearl's mother watching their exchange with interest. Mother, this is Mr. Kip Vance. Pearl introduced them. We met at the barn dance last night. Mr. Vance, this is my mother, Eliza Hayes. A pleasure, madam, Kip said, removing his hat respectfully. Eliza's eyes twinkled knowingly. So, you're the young man who kept my daughter dancing until dawn. I must say, that's quite a feat. Pearl is usually home much earlier. Mother, Pearl protested, a blush coloring her cheeks. The pleasure was entirely mine, Kip assured Mrs. Hayes. Your daughter is an excellent dance partner and guide. I'd have been lost without her instruction. Well, I'm glad to hear it, Eliza replied. Now, what brings you to our store today, Mr. Vance? I'm heading out to the Riverbed Ranch to inquire about work, he explained. Thought I might need some supplies if Mr. Holden sees fit to hire me. A wise precaution, Eliza nodded. Pearl, why don't you help Mr. Vance gather what he needs while I finish these accounts? Pearl stepped around the counter, obviously pleased with this arrangement. Of course. What sort of supplies were you thinking of, Mr. Vance? As they moved through the store, selecting tobacco, coffee, and other necessities, Pearl spoke in a lowered voice. I'm glad you decided to stay, at least for a little while. So am I, Kip admitted, watching as she measured coffee beans into a paper bag. Last night was special. Pearl looked up, meeting his gaze directly. Yes, it was. Their fingers brushed as she handed him the package, and Kip felt a jolt of awareness that had nothing to do with the coffee beans. For a moment, neither of them moved. The bell above the door jingled, breaking the spell as a customer entered the store. Pearl reluctantly stepped away to attend to the newcomer, and Kip continued gathering his supplies. When he approached the counter to pay, Mr. Hayes had appeared from the back room and was arranging a display of hunting knives. The older man sized Kip up with a practiced eye. So you're looking for work at Holden's place? He asked, setting down a polishing cloth. Yes, sir, Kip confirmed. I've worked cattle most of my life. Started as a boy in Texas, been on the trails the last few years. Holden runs a tight operation, Mr. Hayes remarked. Good man, fair employer. Doesn't tolerate troublemakers or slackers. I'm neither, sir, Kip assured him, understanding the unspoken question beneath the storekeeper's words. Mr. Hayes nodded slowly. Mason Holden usually takes his dinner at the Silver Spur around 6. Might be a good time to catch him if you're serious about the position. I appreciate the information, Mr. Hayes. Kip paid for his purchases and gathered the packages. As Pearl wrapped his final item, she slipped a small note beneath the string. Good luck at the riverbed, she said, her public words proper, but her eyes conveying a deeper message. Thank you, Miss Hayes. Kip tipped his hat to the family. Mrs. Hayes, Mr. Hayes, it was a pleasure meeting you both. Outside, once safely out of view of the store windows, Kip unfolded the note Pearl had given him. In neat, flowing script it read, The creek bend past the old mill. Sunday, 2 o'clock. A smile spread across his face as he carefully tucked the note into his vest pocket, close to his heart. With renewed purpose, he headed toward the Silver Spur to await Mason Holden's arrival. The Silver Spur was the largest establishment in Willow Creek, serving as both hotel and restaurant for visitors and a gathering place for locals. By the time Kip arrived, the dinner crowd was beginning to filter in ranchers, shopkeepers, and the occasional traveler all mingling in the warm, wood-paneled dining room. Kip selected a table with a good view of the entrance and ordered a simple meal of steak and potatoes. As he ate, he observed the comings and goings, trying to identify Mason Holden from the descriptions he'd gathered around town. At precisely 6 o'clock, a tall, broad-shouldered man with iron-gray hair and a neatly trimmed beard entered the restaurant. He wore practical ranching clothes, but the quality of his boots and the silver buckle on his belt spoke of prosperity. The respectful nods he received from other diners confirmed Kip's suspicion this was Mason Holden. Kip waited until the rancher had been seated and served his usual whiskey before approaching the table. "Mr. Holden? My name is Kip Vance. I was wondering if I might have a word with you about employment." Holden looked up, assessing Kip with shrewd eyes that missed nothing. "Have a seat, Vance." He gestured to the chair opposite his own. "Where are you from, and what's your experience?" Over the next half hour, Kip outlined his background, emphasizing his years of experience with cattle and horses. Holden listened carefully, occasionally asking pointed questions about specific skills or situations. "I lost 2 good men to those damn gold rumors up in the mountains," Holden finally said, swirling the whiskey in his glass. "Need someone who can commit to at least through the winter and spring roundup. You planning on sticking around that long?" "Yes, sir," Kip answered without hesitation. "I'm looking to put down roots for a spell." Something in his tone must have given him away, because Holden's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Would those roots have anything to do with Everett Hayes's daughter?" "Word travels fast in a small town, son." Kip met the older man's gaze steadily. "I only just met Miss Hayes, sir. But I won't deny she's given me reason to consider Willow Creek more carefully than I might have otherwise." Holden chuckled. "Honest answer. I appreciate that." He drained his glass and set it down with finality. "All right, Vance. I'll give you a try. $30 a month plus room and board. You can start tomorrow if that suits you." "It suits me fine, Mr. Holden. Thank you." They shook hands, and Holden provided directions to the ranch and instructions for the following day. As the rancher departed, Kip couldn't help but feel that things were falling into place in a way they never had before. He had a job, a purpose, and the promise of seeing Pearl again on Sunday. The next morning dawned clear and cool as Kip rode Copper out to the Riverbed Ranch. The property was impressive, a large main house, several outbuildings, a substantial barn, and corrals filled with quality horses. Beyond stretched acres of grazing land, where Holden's cattle fattened on the rich grass of the valley. Kip was greeted by the foreman, a weathered man named Frank Sullivan, who showed him to the bunkhouse and outlined his duties. The work was familiar: mending fences, checking on the herd, breaking new horses, but the setting was more permanent than the nomadic life of a trail driver. Over the next few days, Kip fell into the rhythm of ranch life. The other hands were initially cautious with the newcomer, but his willingness to work hard and his skill with horses soon earned their respect. By the end of the week, he was joining in their poker games and trading stories around the bunkhouse stove in the evenings. But through it all, his thoughts frequently returned to Pearl and their upcoming meeting. Each night, he took out her note and reread it, though he'd long since memorized the words. Sunday couldn't come soon enough. When the day finally arrived, Kip took special care with his appearance, shaving carefully and donning his best shirt. He'd purchased a small box of peppermint candies from the general store the day before, carefully avoiding Pearl herself during the transaction. He rode out to the old mill shortly after lunch, arriving early to scout the location. The creek bend she'd mentioned was a picturesque spot where the water widened and slowed, creating a peaceful pool shaded by cottonwood trees. Someone, Pearl, he assumed, had placed a quilt on the ground beneath the largest tree. At precisely 2 o'clock, he heard the sound of an approaching horse. Pearl appeared on a dappled mare, wearing a simple blue dress and carrying a small basket. Her face lit up when she saw him waiting, and Kip felt his heart skip a beat at the sight of her. "You found it," she called as she dismounted gracefully. Kip hurried to help her, taking the reins of her horse and tethering both animals to a nearby tree. "Your directions were perfect," he replied, taking the basket from her hands. "Though I would have searched all day, if necessary." Pearl laughed, the sound blending harmoniously with the babbling creek. "Such gallantry, Mr. Vance. One might think you were sweet on me." "One might be correct in that assessment, Miss Hayes," he responded, offering his arm to escort her to the quilt. They settled comfortably, and Pearl began unpacking her basket: fresh bread, cheese, sliced apples, and 2 jars of lemonade. "I thought you might appreciate something other than ranch cooking," she explained. "Frank Sullivan is many things, but a chef is not one of them." Kip chuckled. "You've met Frank. Everyone in Willow Creek knows everyone else," Pearl reminded him. "I've known Frank Sullivan since I was a little girl. He used to sneak me peppermint sticks when my father wasn't looking." Speaking of peppermints, Kip produced the small box from his pocket and presented it to her. "Not nearly as impressive as this feast you've prepared, but I remembered you mentioned they were your favorite." Pearl accepted the gift with genuine delight. "How thoughtful. And they're from Henderson's in Denver, the very best kind." As they shared the simple meal, they talked about Kip's first week at the ranch, Pearl's work at the store, and the various characters that made up Willow Creek's population. The conversation flowed easily between them, punctuated by laughter and moments of companionable silence. "Why did you ask me here today?" Kip finally asked as they watched the sunlight dapple through the leaves above them. Pearl considered the question carefully. "Because in all my 20 years, I've never met anyone who made me feel the way I did dancing with you. Like the world was bigger and brighter than I'd realized, but not too big to explore if I had the right companion." She met his gaze directly. "Was I wrong to be so forward?"
"No," Kip answered softly.
"You weren't wrong at all." Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned closer. Pearl's eyes fluttered closed as their lips met in a gentle kiss that held all the promise of new beginnings. When they parted, both were smiling. "I should warn you," Pearl said, her voice slightly breathless. "My father will expect your intentions to be honorable if we continue seeing each other." "I wouldn't have them any other way," Kip assured her, taking her hand in his. "I may be new to Willow Creek, Pearl, but I'm not new to knowing my own mind. And my mind is quite made up about you." The afternoon passed too quickly, filled with conversation, more tentative kisses, and plans for future meetings. As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, they reluctantly packed up the remains of their picnic and prepared to return to town. "Same time next Sunday?" Pearl asked as Kip helped her mount her horse. "I'll be counting the minutes," he promised, pressing a final kiss to her hand before releasing it. They rode back toward town side by side, parting at the crossroads where Kip would turn north toward the ranch. As Pearl continued on alone, she glanced back once, a smile illuminating her face when she saw that Kip was still watching her go. The weeks that followed established a pattern that suited them both. Sundays were reserved for their private meetings by the creek, weather permitting, or in the Hayes family parlor when the autumn rains made outdoor gatherings impossible. On Wednesday evenings, Kip would come to town for dinner with Pearl and her parents, gradually earning Everett Hayes's grudging approval and Eliza's more enthusiastic endorsement. Mason Holden proved to be a fair employer, and Kip's responsibilities at the ranch increased as he demonstrated his capabilities. By late November, he had been promoted to assistant foreman, with a corresponding increase in pay and a small cabin of his own near the main house. As winter settled over the valley, bringing snow and bitter winds, the people of Willow Creek turned inward, gathering for communal activities that would sustain them through the cold months. Chief among these was the Christmas Eve dance, second only to the harvest celebration in its importance to the town. For Kip, the occasion held special significance. It would mark 3 months since he had first danced with Pearl, 3 months since his life had changed course so dramatically. And he had plans to ensure this dance would be even more memorable than the first. The week before Christmas, he rode into town with a specific purpose in mind. After securing Mason Holden's blessing for his intentions, he had only one more person to consult before proceeding. Everett Hayes was alone in the store when Kip entered, taking inventory of the holiday merchandise. The bell above the door caused him to look up, and his expression softened slightly at the sight of his daughter's suitor. "Afternoon, Kip," he greeted, setting aside his ledger. Pearl's not here. She and her mother are at the church, decorating for the Christmas service. Actually, sir, it's you I came to see, Kip replied, removing his hat and approaching the counter. I was hoping we might have a private word. Understanding dawned in Everett's eyes, and he gestured toward the back room. Let's talk in my office. The small room was cluttered but organized, with neat stacks of papers and account books lining the shelves. Everett closed the door and took a seat behind his desk, indicating that Kip should take the chair opposite. I think I know why you're here, son, he said without preamble. You want to marry my daughter. Kip nodded, appreciating the older man's directness. Yes, sir, I do. I love Pearl more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. She's brought joy and purpose to my life, and I hope that I've brought some happiness to hers as well. And what do you have to offer my daughter? Everett asked, his tone not unkind but serious. 3 months ago, you were a drifter with no fixed address and no prospects beyond the next cattle drive. That's fair, Kip acknowledged. But things have changed. I've saved every penny of my wages. I've got a good position at the riverbed that Mason says will be permanent if I want it. And I've purchased a parcel of land just outside town, 10 acres with access to the creek and good soil for farming. Everett's eyebrows rose in surprise. You bought Widow Jensen's place? Last week, Kip confirmed. The cabin needs work, but it's sound. By spring, I can have it ready for a bride. He leaned forward earnestly. I know I haven't known Pearl for very long, Mr. Hayes. But I've lived enough to recognize what's important when I find it. Your daughter is what's important. And I swear to you, I'll spend every day making sure she never regrets choosing me. Everett studied him for a long moment, then rose and walked to a cabinet in the corner. He withdrew a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses, pouring a measure into each. My Eliza and I had known each other just 6 weeks when I asked her father for her hand, he said, offering one of the glasses to Kip. Her father thought I was too young, too poor, and too foolish to deserve her. He might have been right about the young and poor parts, but loving Eliza was the smartest thing I ever did. He raised his glass. You have my blessing, son. But I warn you, Pearl has a mind of her own. Always has. It's her answer that matters most. Kip touched his glass to Everett's.
Thank you, sir.
I wouldn't have it any other way. The Christmas Eve dance transformed the town hall into a winter wonderland, with evergreen boughs, red ribbons, and twinkling candles creating a magical atmosphere. The cold outside only heightened the warmth within as families and friends gathered to celebrate the season. Kip arrived early, the small velvet box in his pocket both a weight and a promise. He had chosen the ring carefully, a delicate gold band set with a single pearl flanked by 2 small diamonds. The jeweler in Denver had assured him it was both elegant and unique, much like the woman it was intended for. Pearl arrived with her parents shortly after 7, her green velvet dress complementing her auburn hair, which she had arranged in an elaborate updo for the occasion. She spotted Kip immediately and made her way to his side, her eyes bright with excitement. Merry Christmas, she greeted him, accepting his kiss on her cheek. Isn't it beautiful? The decorating committee outdid themselves this year. Beautiful indeed, Kip agreed, though his eyes never left her face. But not nearly as beautiful as you. The band struck up the first dance, and without hesitation, Pearl took Kip's hand, leading him onto the floor. Unlike their first dance, there was no awkwardness in his steps now. Months of practice during their Sunday meetings had made him a confident partner, and they moved together with the ease of 2 people perfectly attuned to each other's rhythms. Do you remember the harvest dance? Pearl asked as they waltzed. How nervous you were when I first pulled you onto the floor. I remember thinking I'd never seen anyone as lovely as you, Kip replied, and wondering what on earth a sophisticated town girl was doing wasting her time with a dusty cowboy. Pearl laughed. Sophisticated?
Me?
I'd never been further than Denver in my entire life. You seemed worldly to me, Kip insisted, and entirely out of my reach. Well, I'm glad you reached anyway, she said softly, squeezing his hand. As the evening progressed, they danced every dance together, just as they had that first night. Several times, Kip's hand strayed to his pocket, checking that the ring was still secure. He had planned his proposal carefully, wanting everything to be perfect. At midnight, following tradition, the band played Silent Night as the dancers paused to welcome Christmas Day. As the final notes faded, the bandleader announced that the next dance would be the last of the evening. Kip took Pearl's hand and led her not to the dance floor but toward the doors that opened onto the small balcony overlooking the town square. The night was clear and cold, stars blazing in the black sky above, and their breath formed small clouds in the frosty air. "Aren't we going to dance?" Pearl asked, puzzled but willingly following him outside. In a moment, Kip promised. "But first, I wanted a moment alone with you." He took both her hands in his, suddenly nervous despite all his preparation. "Pearl, when I rode into Willow Creek 3 months ago, I thought I was just passing through. I had no idea I was riding straight toward my future toward you." Pearl's eyes widened as she began to understand where this was leading. "You've changed everything for me," Kip continued. "You've given me a home, a purpose, and more joy than I ever thought possible. I can't imagine my life without you in it, and I don't want to try." Slowly, he lowered himself to one knee, still holding her hands as he looked up into her face. "Pearl Hayes, I love you with all my heart. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears filled Pearl's eyes as she nodded, too overcome to speak for a moment. Finally, she managed a breathless yes. "Yes, Kip, I will." He rose and wrapped her in his arms, kissing her with all the love and promise he felt for their future together. When they finally parted, he reached into his pocket and withdrew the ring, slipping it onto her finger. "It's perfect," Pearl whispered, admiring the way the pearl caught the starlight. "Absolutely perfect." From inside, they could hear the band beginning the final waltz. Kip offered his arm with a smile. "May I have this dance, Miss Hayes? And every dance for the rest of our lives." Pearl's answering smile was radiant as she placed her hand on his arm. "There's nothing I want more, Mr. Vance." They returned to the dance floor for the final waltz, but this time, something had changed. As they moved in perfect harmony, the other dancers seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of them in a world of their own making. And when the music finally ended, they both knew it was just the beginning of their story. The news of Kip and Pearl's engagement spread through Willow Creek like wildfire the day after Christmas. By the time they attended church services on Sunday, the entire town had heard and formed opinions on the match. Most were supportive, though a few expressed surprise at the speed of the courtship. "Let them talk," Pearl said dismissively as they walked arm in arm back to her parents' house for Sunday dinner. "They'll find something else to gossip about soon enough." "Does it bother you?" "The talk?" Kip asked, concerned that Pearl might face social consequences for choosing a relative newcomer over one of the established young men in town. Pearl stopped walking and turned to face him, her expression serious. "Kip Vance, I have loved exactly one man in my life, and I'm walking beside him right now. I don't give a fig what anyone else thinks about that." Her vehemence made him smile. "Have I told you today how much I love you?" "Yes, but I wouldn't object to hearing it again," she replied, her mock seriousness giving way to a smile of her own. "I love you, Pearl Hayes," he said, pressing a quick kiss to her lips despite their public location. Soon to be Pearl Vance. The winter months passed in a flurry of activity as they prepared for both their wedding and their future together. Every spare moment Kip had away from his duties at the ranch was spent renovating the cabin on his newly purchased land. With help from Pearl's father and several friends from town, the small structure was gradually transformed into a cozy home worthy of his bride. Pearl, meanwhile, worked with her mother on her trousseau and the many details of the wedding itself, planned for the first Saturday in April. The ceremony would be held in the town's white clapboard church, followed by a celebration in the town hall that promised to rival the Christmas dance in its festivity. As winter gave way to spring, the land around Willow Creek came alive with new growth. The snow melted, revealing tender green shoots pushing up through the soil. The creek swelled with runoff from the mountains, and birds returned to build nests in the trees. On a sunny afternoon in late March, Kip brought Pearl to see the completed cabin for the first time. He'd been working on it for months, but had insisted that she wait until it was finished before visiting, wanting to surprise her with the transformation. As they rode up the winding path to the small rise where the cabin stood, Pearl gasped in delight. The rough exterior had been repaired and painted a cheerful yellow, with white trim around the windows and door. A covered porch wrapped around two sides of the building, furnished with a swing and rocking chairs. Flower boxes hung beneath the windows, ready for planting, and a neat stone path led from the barn to the front steps. "Oh, Kip," Pearl breathed as he helped her down from her horse. "It's perfect." "Wait until you see inside," he said, leading her up the steps and pausing at the threshold. "Ready?" At her nod, he swung the door open and lifted her into his arms, carrying her across the threshold as he would on their wedding day. Pearl laughed in surprise but wrapped her arms around his neck, pressing a kiss to his cheek as he set her down in the center of the main room. The interior was simple but welcoming, with polished wooden floors, whitewashed walls, and curtains that Pearl recognized as having been sewn by her mother. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, while windows on the others let in ample light. The furniture was a mix of pieces Kip had purchased or built himself, along with a few family heirlooms the Hayes had contributed. "This will be our sitting room," Kip explained, guiding her through the space. "And through here is the kitchen." The kitchen was Pearl's domain, and he had taken special care with it, installing shelves for her cookbooks and dishes, a pump at the sink for easy access to water, and a new cook stove that had been his largest expense. Beyond the kitchen was a small dining room, and upstairs, two bedrooms, one larger one for them, and a smaller one that Kip described as for the future, his ears reddening slightly as Pearl smiled knowingly. "And there's one more thing," he said, leading her back downstairs and out the rear door. Behind the house, protected by a stand of pine trees, was a small garden already tilled and ready for planting. In its center stood an apple tree, its branches just beginning to bud. "Mr. Jensen planted it for his wife when they first settled here," Kip explained. I thought we might continue the tradition. Plant something new each year we're together." Pearl's eyes filled with tears as she turned to embrace him. "It's more than I ever dreamed of, Kip. Our home." "Our home," he repeated, the words filling him with pride and purpose. "For all the days to come." The wedding day dawned clear and mild, with just enough breeze to carry the scent of spring blossoms through the town. Kip, who had spent the night at the ranch at Eliza Hayes's insistence on tradition, rose before dawn, too excited to sleep any longer. Frank Sullivan, who would stand as his best man, found him on the porch of his cabin, already dressed in his new suit, staring eastward as the first hints of light appeared on the horizon. "Nervous?" the foreman asked, offering Kip a cup of coffee. "Not about marrying Pearl," Kip replied, accepting the steaming mug gratefully. "Just about getting through the ceremony without making a fool of myself. Public speaking isn't my strong suit." Frank chuckled. "You'll do fine. Just keep your eyes on your bride and forget everyone else is there." It was good advice, and Kip found himself following it to the letter as he stood at the altar hours later, watching Pearl walk down the aisle on her father's arm. Her dress was simple but elegant, ivory satin with lace accents that had once adorned her mother's wedding gown. Her veil was held in place by a crown of spring flowers, and she carried a bouquet of wild flowers tied with a blue ribbon. But it was her smile, radiant and meant only for him, that captured Kip's attention completely. As Everett placed his daughter's hand in Kip's, the rest of the church seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of them in a moment of perfect connection. The ceremony itself passed in something of a blur. Kip remembered speaking his vows, his voice steady and sure as he promised to love, honor, and cherish Pearl for all the days of his life. He remembered the cool slide of the gold band as he placed it on her finger, joining the engagement ring he'd given her at Christmas. And he remembered, with perfect clarity, the moment the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, and the sweet kiss they shared to seal their union. The celebration afterward was everything Pearl had hoped for: music, dancing, food, and the good wishes of everyone they held dear. Mason Holden presented them with a pair of fine horses as a wedding gift, while Pearl's parents gave them a beautiful quilt Eliza had been secretly working on for months. Friends and neighbors contributed practical items for their new home, and by the time the last guest departed, the newlyweds were overwhelmed with gratitude for the community that had embraced their love story. As the sun set on their wedding day, Kip and Pearl rode together to their cabin, their home, to begin their life as husband and wife. The porch light glowed warmly in welcome, and inside, everything was ready for their arrival. Eliza and several friends had come ahead to prepare the house, lighting the fire, turning down the bed, and leaving a cold supper for them in the kitchen. But food was the furthest thing from their minds as Kip once again carried Pearl across the threshold, this time as Mrs. Vance. Their kisses, no longer constrained by propriety, grew deeper and more urgent as they discovered the joys of marriage in the privacy of their bedroom, the first of many nights they would spend in each other's arms. Later, as Pearl slept peacefully beside him, Kip gazed at his wife in the soft moonlight filtering through the curtains. He thought of the long, winding trail that had led him to Willow Creek, to the harvest dance, to Pearl. How different his life might have been if he decided to head south that autumn day instead of stopping in this small town. "What are you thinking about?" Pearl murmured, her eyes still closed but a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "How lucky I am," Kip replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "How one dance changed everything." Pearl opened her eyes, reaching up to touch his face tenderly. "One dance was all it took for me to know," she whispered. "I think I started falling in love with you that very first night." "I know I did," Kip admitted. "The moment you smiled at me by the punch bowl." Pearl laughed softly. "The spiked punch bowl, you mean? Maybe that's why I was brave enough to dance with you. Liquid courage. Well, whatever the reason, I'm glad you did." Pearl nestled closer against his side. "And I'm glad you stayed." "Wild horses couldn't drag me away now," Kip promised, wrapping his arms around his wife as they drifted back to sleep, secure in their love and the future they would build together. Spring gave way to summer, and summer to fall, as Kip and Pearl settled into the rhythms of married life. The cabin became truly their home as they added personal touches: a bookshelf Kip built to hold Pearl's growing collection of novels, curtains she sewed from fabric chosen on a trip to Denver, a rocking chair that moved from the porch to the fireside as the weather cooled. Their garden flourished under Pearl's care, providing vegetables for their table and flowers for the house. True to his word, Kip planted a cherry tree beside the apple, marking their first anniversary with roots that would grow alongside their love. In town, Pearl continued to help at the general store several days a week, while Kip's position at the Riverbed Ranch became increasingly important as Mason Holden, now in his 60s, began to step back from the daily operations. The arrangement suited them both. Kip's work kept him challenged and provided well for their needs, while Pearl maintained her connection to the community she loved. Their Sunday tradition continued, though now, instead of meeting secretly by the creek, they often hosted family and friends for dinner after church. The Hayes were frequent visitors, as were Frank Sullivan and his wife, and several other couples from town who had become close friends. It was during one such Sunday gathering, as winter approached again, that Pearl whispered a special piece of news in Kip's ear while their guests were engaged in a lively debate about the upcoming election. "Really?" he asked, his voice low, but his eyes wide with wonder. "You're certain?" Pearl nodded, her hand unconsciously moving to rest on her still, flat stomach. "Dr. Miller confirmed it yesterday. We'll welcome our little one in early summer." Kip's face split into a grin so broad it seemed it might never fade. Without caring about their audience, he pulled Pearl into a tight embrace, then, remembering her condition, loosened his grip slightly. "Careful with my wife, Vance," Everett called from across the room, having noticed the display of affection. "What's got you so excited anyway?" Kip looked to Pearl, who nodded her permission. "Well, sir," he announced, his voice trembling slightly with emotion, "it seems you and Eliza will be grandparents come June." The room erupted in cheers and congratulations, with Eliza rushing to embrace her daughter, while Everett clapped Kip firmly on the back, his eyes suspiciously bright. Mason Holden immediately began discussing the need for a cradle, offering to provide the finest wood from his own supply, while Frank's wife, Martha, promised to begin knitting baby clothes right away. As their friends celebrated around them, Kip took Pearl's hand, squeezing it gently. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she assured him, leaning her head against his shoulder. "What about you, Mr. Vance? Ready to be a father? With you as the mother of my child?" "I couldn't be more ready," he replied. "Or more grateful." The months of Pearl's pregnancy passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. The small second bedroom was transformed into a nursery, with a cradle lovingly crafted by Mason Holden, curtains sewn by Eliza, and a rocking chair that had been in the Hayes family for generations. Kip found himself both excited and terrified at the prospect of fatherhood. Having lost his own parents young and been raised by an uncle who, while not unkind, had been distant at best, he had few models for the kind of father he wanted to be. But Pearl's confidence in him never wavered, and her own excitement was infectious. "You'll be wonderful with our child," she assured him one evening as they sat on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "You have so much love to give, Kip. I see it every day in how you treat me, how you care for our home and land. That's all a child really needs, love and presence." Her words calmed his fears, and as spring once again brought new life to the land around their home, Kip found himself eagerly anticipating the newest addition to their family. June arrived with warm days and cool nights, perfect weather for the birthing time, according to the older women in town. On the morning of the 20th, Pearl awoke early, a hand pressed to her lower back. "I think today might be the day," she told Kip calmly as he prepared to leave for the ranch. "Nothing urgent yet, but I feel different." Kip immediately canceled his plans, sending word to Frank that he would not be coming in. Despite Pearl's protests that first babies often took their time arriving, he refused to leave her side, instead busying himself with chores close to the house while keeping a watchful eye on his wife. By midday, Pearl's discomfort had increased enough that Kip rode to town to fetch both Dr. Miller and Eliza Hayes. The doctor confirmed that labor had begun but advised that it would likely be several hours before the baby arrived. Eliza took charge of the household, sending Kip for water, fresh linens, and various other necessities, while she helped Pearl walk around the house to ease her pains. As afternoon turned to evening, Pearl's labor intensified. Kip remained by her side, holding her hand through contractions, wiping her brow with a cool cloth, and murmuring words of encouragement and love. Though it pained him to see her suffering, he was awed by her strength and determination. Just as the first stars appeared in the night sky, Pearl gave a final, tremendous push, and their child entered the world with a lusty cry that seemed far too powerful for such a tiny being. "A daughter," Dr. Miller announced, placing the squirming, red-faced infant on Pearl's chest after cutting the cord. "A beautiful, healthy girl." Kip stared in wonder at the perfect little person they had created. 10 tiny fingers, 10 tiny toes, a dusting of dark hair, and eyes that, when they briefly opened, seemed to hold all the wisdom of the ages. "Hello, little one," Pearl whispered, tears of joy streaming down her face as she cradled their daughter. "We've been waiting for you." "She's perfect," Kip managed, his voice thick with emotion. "Just like her mother." After ensuring that both mother and child were well, Dr. Miller departed, leaving Eliza to help Pearl clean up and settle comfortably in bed with the baby. Once they were situated, Eliza tactfully withdrew to the kitchen, giving the new family a moment of privacy. "What shall we name her?" Pearl asked as Kip perched carefully on the edge of the bed, one finger captured in his daughter's surprisingly strong grip. They had discussed various options throughout the pregnancy, but had never settled on a final choice. Now, looking at their daughter's face, Kip knew exactly what her name should be. "Hope," he suggested softly. "Because that's what she is, all our hopes and dreams made real." Pearl's smile was radiant despite her exhaustion. "Hope Elizabeth Vance," she agreed, adding her mother's name as they had planned. "It's perfect." Kip leaned down to kiss first his wife, then the downy head of his daughter. "Thank you," he whispered, unable to find words adequate to express the depth of his gratitude for the family Pearl had given him. "For what?" Pearl asked, her eyes beginning to droop with well-earned fatigue. "For dancing with me that night," he replied simply. "For changing my life." Pearl's smile was the last thing he saw before she drifted off to sleep, their daughter nestled securely between them, the three of them a family bound by love that had begun with a single dance. Epilogue. 5 years later, the annual harvest dance was in full swing as Kip entered the barn, 5-year-old Hope perched on his shoulders and 2-year-old Everett holding tightly to his hand. The familiar sight of neighbors and friends dancing to the lively fiddle music brought a smile to his face as he searched the crowd for his wife. Pearl was easy to spot, her auburn hair now styled in a simpler fashion than when they had first met, but still catching the light like burnished copper. She was helping arrange the refreshment table, laughing at something Martha Sullivan had said while simultaneously directing a group of young girls on where to place the apple cider.
"Nana,"
Hope called, waving excitedly from her perch. "We're here." Pearl looked up, her face brightening at the sight of her family. She excused herself from her duties and made her way through the crowd to greet them, bending first to scoop up little Everett, whose patience for walking had evidently run out. "My handsome men," she said, kissing Everett's chubby cheek before standing on tiptoe to kiss Kip. "And my beautiful girl," she added, reaching up to tickle Hope's side, eliciting a giggle from their daughter. "Sorry we're late," Kip apologized. Someone couldn't decide which ribbon to wear in her hair. He glanced meaningfully upward at Hope, who had eventually settled on a blue ribbon that matched her dress. "It had to be perfect," Hope explained seriously. "Grammy said first impressions are important." Pearl laughed. "Your Grammy is right, but you would look beautiful in any ribbon." She turned to Kip. "Mother and father are over by the cider. They've been asking about you." "Let's go say hello then," Kip suggested, letting Hope slide down from his shoulders. As a family, they made their way through the crowd, stopping frequently to exchange greetings with friends and neighbors. Willow Creek had grown in the years since Kip had first arrived, with new families settling in the fertile valley and the town expanding to accommodate them. But it still maintained the close-knit community feel that had first captured his heart. Everett and Eliza Hayes welcomed them warmly, immediately engaging their grandchildren in conversation about the festivities. At 70, Everett had finally allowed himself to retire from active management of the store, though he still kept the books and offered advice to the young couple who had purchased the business. Eliza, a few years younger, remained as vibrant as ever, dividing her time between church activities, grandmothering, and her beloved garden. "Mason was looking for you earlier," Everett informed Kip after the initial greetings. "Something about that new breeding program you're starting." Kip nodded. "I'll find him later." Tonight is for dancing, not business. He winked at Pearl, who smiled knowingly. 6 months earlier, Mason Holden had made Kip a surprising offer. With no children of his own, and advancing age making the rigors of ranching increasingly difficult, he had proposed that Kip become his partner in the Riverbed Ranch, with an eye toward eventually taking over completely. It was an opportunity beyond anything Kip could have imagined when he'd first ridden into town, and one that would secure his family's future for generations to come. The band struck up a waltz, and Kip turned to his wife with a formal bow. "Mrs. Vance, would you do me the honor of this dance?"
Pearl curtsied playfully.
"I would be delighted, Mr. Vance." "Can I dance too, Papa?" Hope asked, her eyes wide with excitement. "Of course, sweetheart," Kip replied, lifting her into his arms. "You can stand on my feet, just like we practiced." Together, the three of them moved onto the dance floor, with Everett watching contentedly from his grandmother's lap. Hope balanced on her father's boots, giggling as he guided them through the steps of the waltz, while Pearl danced alongside them, occasionally spinning under Kip's raised arm to Hope's delight. As they danced, Kip caught Pearl's eye over their daughter's head. "Happy?" he asked softly. Pearl's smile was answer enough, but she spoke anyway. "More than I ever dreamed possible." "You?" Kip looked around at the community that had become his home, at the children they had created together, and finally at the woman who had changed his life with a single dance. "I'm the luckiest man alive," he replied simply. "And I intend to stay that way." The music continued long into the night, and just as they had at their first harvest dance, Kip and Pearl took every song together. But now, their dances included improvised steps to accommodate small partners, breaks to attend to tired children, and the comfortable synchronicity that comes from years of moving through life as one. And when the final notes of the last song faded into silence, and they gathered their sleeping children to head home, Kip and Pearl stepped out into the dawn of another day together, their love as bright and enduring as the rising sun.